was awesome today. And I didn't get back to you about fixing it because I don't know, but I know the music is going to be wonderful and it's all going to work perfectly.
Well, but it is a little Sunday, so.
Okay. Perfect. Good to know.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Fine. We're good. Yeah, I'm like, wow.
Perfect.
We're into Hell Week now, opening the middle school play.
Yeah.
So I'm just 12, 15 hours over there. Okay.
Thank you. All right. I want to welcome you all, and we're starting our class. And again, let's give Ralph a hand for the wonderful message today. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And we're online as well. So this is our community member orientation. And typically we start with prayer because we're grounded in prayer. We're grounded in the presence. We're grounded in the consciousness of prayer. So I just invite those of you who are online, those of you who are here in person, to just center in. If you wish, you can close your eyes or relax your gaze or whatever is comfortable for you. And as we take a deep breath, we tune into the presence within. The presence of the divine, the presence of the Christ living as us. We know in this moment that there's only one power and one presence active as our lives and as the universe. And we know that this presence is here, surrounding us, filling us, blessing this time together. We give thanks, and so it is. Amen. Well, thank you for being here. And this class is being taught by me, Reverend Tim Lytle, and by Reverend Johanna Kelly. Her name didn't get up here, but sorry. We need to get you in the credits. And so I want to just go over a few things. And this won't be real long. I'm thinking hour and a half, maybe at the longest 2 hours. Okay? So if you need to leave early, I want you to know that you can do that. But if you can stay for the whole time, I'd really like to encourage that. And Tina, our volunteer coordinator, is always on hand to make sure that things get done. So she's handing out fans. So fans are coming over to your side as well. So I want to just start with a little bit of history. And Reverend Johanna, I need to watch. I'm used to being up here, you know. I know, I'm stumbling. So, Reverend Johanna, feel free to jump in at any point that you would like to. But I wanted to start just with a little background. I didn't want to go real deep into Unity's background. But basically, Unity came out of a movement in the late 1800s. And it's often referred to as the New Thought movement. Like there's a new thought about spirituality, a new thought about Jesus. But it's not actually new. I mean, because these are teachings that were taught at the very beginnings of Christianity. So I suppose it's new, but really it's quite ancient. And so one of the modern teachers of New Thought was Emma Curtis Hopkins. How many people here have ever heard of Emma Curtis Hopkins? Okay, wow, more than I realized. Emma Curtis Hopkins had been an assistant of Mary Baker Eddy. Who can tell me who Mary Baker Eddy is? Go ahead. Who is she? Founder of Christian Science. So Emma Curtis Hopkins had been her assistant and editor and they had worked closely together. And Emma Curtis Hopkins continued to grow and evolve and expand. Mary Baker Eddy, whose teachings are very valuable and very beautiful from Christian Science, never wanted her teachings to be modified, altered, changed in any way. So to this day, in Christian Science, they still keep to quite closely adhere to the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy. Well, Emma Curtis Hopkins was expanding and going beyond that. Eventually, Emma Curtis Hopkins and Mary Baker Eddy parted ways. In those days, the term Christian Science was applied to a lot of different movements. Almost any metaphysical movement or New Thought movement was called Christian Science. Initially, the Fillmores used that term. The Fillmores were the co-founders of the Unity movement. But in any case, Emma Curtis Hopkins is referred to as the teacher of teachers. Now, once in a while, I'm moving, and I guess Thomas can follow me. Thank you, Thomas, for helping us. Thomas is our chair of our board. Let's give Thomas a hand, who's helping us here this morning. And so she's called the teacher of teachers because she taught people like Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes is the one who developed science of mind, which became known as religious science, now called Centers for Spiritual Living. And Melinda Kramer, who's one of the founders of Divine Science, and Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were ordained by her and educated by her. So I'm just saying, unity is part of a larger group than just unity. And many of these teachings have gone out into the general public. Like this morning, I was referring to Oprah and Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou was a Unity True student. Oprah is very familiar with Unity and its teachings. Joel Osteen, if you listen to Joel, he's very Bible-based, but if you listen to him, he's teaching many New Thought principles. It's kind of disseminated into the wider general population. But Unity helped to bring that forth into much of our culture. So here on the left is Charles, on the right is Myrtle. Charles Fillmore, in many ways, was self-educated. He went through 6th grade and grew up on a reservation part of his life. But he was he had an insatiable curiosity for knowledge, and he had a tutor that taught him Plato and Shakespeare and Emerson. And so Charles Fillmore studied the Transcendentalists, like Emerson and Thoreau, and also philosophers, and he developed this keen interest in reading and developing his mind and growing. Myrtle grew up in a pretty prestigious family in Oberlin, Ohio. I believe it is Oberlin. And they had a college there. So Myrtle graduated from college. She was a teacher. So she was a very educated person. And there's letters between Myrtle and Charles before they were married. And at one point, Charles was questioning her orthodoxy. She grew up in the Methodist Church, and she was always questioning what they were bringing up, in Sunday school and so forth. And so Charles questioned her orthodoxy, not that he was Orthodox, and she said, I am decidedly eclectic. She chose at the very beginning to be eclectic and to go for the truth, wherever the truth might be. Well, that's kind of where Charles was at, too. Anyway, they got married. But Myrtle Fillmore, from about the age of 4 or 5, had really, really serious medical problems. And in fact, at one point in her life, she was told that she had terminal tuberculosis. Now, tuberculosis may not have been as clearly diagnosed in those days as it is now, but there were a lot of people in Myrtle's family who had died or were sick from what was being called tuberculosis, and she was told that she inherited this from her family. Now, she and Charles went to a lecture of a New Thought teacher by the name of E.B. Weeks. And E.B. Weeks gave this lecture and gave this affirmation. I am a child of God, and therefore do not inherit sickness. Now think about that. That's an affirmation and a denial. An affirmation is where we're affirming the truth. Denial is where we're taking energy away from some erroneous thought that we have had. So the first part of that is the affirmation. I am a child of God. The second part is the denial, taking energy away from false belief. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. Now remember, Myrtle had been taught that she inherited sickness, that she inherited this terminal condition. She was given 6 months to live at this point. She really grabbed a hold of that affirmation, that she's a child of God. Therefore, how could she inherit sickness? Because God is her source. God is her parent. She comes from God. How could she inherit sickness? For the next 2 years, daily, using that affirmation as well as for hours each day, sitting down, talking to the parts of her body, the organs of her body, and asking the parts of her body for forgiveness for ever calling any of them weak or diseased or ill, doing that work. And she would keep an empty chair where she would pray. And the empty chair was for Jesus. And so she'd have Jesus come in and they'd have a talk, you know. Now, Charles was more of a skeptic, kind of like, oh, okay. He was not that impressed with E.B. Weeks' lecture, but he saw Myrtle really applying herself to this. After 2 years, there was no sign, no evidence, no symptoms of illness or sickness anywhere in Myrtle's body. And Charles was like, what's up with this? So, Myrtle is called the mother of unity. Myrtle is the first one who got it. And Myrtle helped Charles to get it. Charles had had a bad hip injury as a child. At times it was necrotic, dead tissue, and he had it caused one of his legs to be shorter and shriveled and so forth, so he had to have a brace on the leg. And he thought, well, if Myrtle can do this, let me try it. So it's like experiment with truth, you know. And so he worked with his leg, and continued to do this same kind of work until eventually he no longer needed to wear a brace on his leg. He could get around well, and in measuring his leg, it actually grew as an adult. Just soak that one in. Yeah, I think it was 4 inches. That's what I heard.
And the story I heard was someone asked him what he was doing, and he said he had just made 2,000 affirmations to grow the bone.
Yeah, so this was not a simple process. They engaged in it thoroughly. But what happened was that people became really, really convinced that, hey, there's something to this kind of prayer, and it's called affirmative prayer. It's not like begging God for something, and it's fine. We don't have any prayer police here. You can pray in any way you want. You know, like petitionary prayer is where we're asking God for something. You can do that. My wife, who may be watching right now and will just cringe that I'm saying this, is not a person that typically prays for something. But she had lost something valuable to her while she's there in Wichita. And so she was telling me she was praying for it. So there's nothing wrong with, and she did find it. So there's nothing wrong with petitionary prayer. But in Unity, we most often teach what's called affirmative prayer, where we affirm the truth, where we are praying as the presence of God. We are affirming the truth and knowing the truth, living in, through, and as us. Like Jesus did, you know, he just affirmed things. Lazarus, come forth. You know, and it's like, I didn't hear any begging or pleading or any of that in the whole prayer. So, as a kid, the prayers of Jesus didn't make a lot of sense to me because it, you know, and I even said this Sunday school, like, it doesn't sound like he's asking at all. He's just declaring. And they said, well, that's because he was Jesus. But whenever there was a healing, Jesus said, your faith has healed you. That's what Jesus taught. He didn't say, I did it. He said, your faith has healed you. So unity, again, this is really not new. It's going back to the Gospels, that we can declare a thing and it shall be done to us. You know? Our word does not return to us void. So Myrtle and Charles started something called the Society of Silent Help. The Society of Silent Help. And people would line up for blocks to pray with them. They'd line up for blocks because they knew something was happening here. And people would gather together for prayer. And I'm getting chicken skin just thinking of this, because from that time to this, there's been an unbroken stream of prayer that has gone on for over 125 years. An unbroken stream of prayer. And by the way, you can pray with Silent Unity. It's now called Silent Unity instead of the Society of Silent Help. Silent Unity. Now, the 1-800 number is 1-800-NOW-PRAY. I forgot to bring my daily word. I'm looking at Johanna. That's okay. The daily word is our little devotional guide, and there's a daily affirmation and inspirational message and prayer for each day. And in the daily word, you can see the other numbers there are for Silent Unity. But it's always easy for me to remember 1-800-NOW-PRAY. So, from that vision, and from, I think it was in 1918, when they first bought 56 acres close to Lee Summit, Missouri, which is now part of the Kansas City cosmopolitan area. Charles Fillmore was a business person, was in real estate. Okay, from those humble beginnings, this is now what Unity Village looks like. So how many people here have ever been to Unity Village? Anybody? We need to get us a tour going. Okay. That's right, and I'll see you there because you'll be at the convention. Right. So this is Silent Unity, a lot of Italian Renaissance type architecture. One of the sons of Myrtle and Charles was very much in architecture after traveling in Europe. And so a lot of this architecture is modeled after places that he saw in Europe. And they designed on site how to create this and how to create a marbled look to the buildings. Kansas City is known as the City of Fountains. Unity Village has the largest fountain display in the Kansas City area. These fountains are the length or a little longer of a football field. And nationally known Rose Garden and so forth. Here's a more aerial view of it. That tower right in the middle is the water tower that provides water to the whole place. There's lakes that they bring water in from and purify. And so this, let's see, do I have a little pointer? Is that what this is at the top? Right there, okay. So this building right here is where Silent Unity is, although a number of telephone prayer ministry people are now doing it from home as well. And Unity Worldwide Ministries now has their offices in this building as well. And this building over here was one of the first buildings built there in 1928. Used to be where the seminary was. And this is called the Bridge of Faith. So it's a really gorgeous place. You can see, now this is just showing the buildings. It's now about 1,500 acres, most of which is a wildlife refuge, beautiful trails and hikes, to lakes. It's a gorgeous place, and it has a 9-hole golf course. And one of the first 6 hotels in our country that was certified as a green hotel, a hotel using green technology. It's a beautiful hotel. It's now with the Ascend hotel group, which is part of Choice Hotels. It's a beautiful, beautiful hotel. All right, now, some of this we've gone over, some of this we haven't. Who is called the teacher of teachers? Emma Curtis Hopkins, right. Now, we haven't covered this next one yet, so I'll skip that because we'll get to it soon. Some of you already know, but all right, who are the co-founders of the Unity movement? Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. Oh, why am I going there? Myrtle Fillmore used a powerful affirmation from E.B. Weeks to treat herself. What is that affirmation? Good. You all said it. Let's say it together. I am a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. Okay. Now, this last one, I don't think I'll go into right now, but something you can think about. What is it that makes Unity unique? And there's a number of things. I mean, one is that we're not a dogmatic church. We're very open-ended, and yet we have very definite teachings and principles that we teach. So a person can be part of Unity and be Buddhist, can be atheist, can be Hindu, can be Muslim, and wherever they are on their spiritual journey, they can still be part of unity. You know, you don't have to like sign up. You know, a number of churches, they might have 25 things on their creed, and to become a member, you sign that you agree to this whole statement. Unity does not have that. It's more open-ended, but we have definite teachings and practices. So there's several things about us that you've probably noticed that make us a little bit different, which really fits for me. Okay, number 2, which of the 5 principles speaks of the divinity of humanity? Okay, let me go through these 5 basic principles. And where did Reverend Johanna go? Where are you? She just slipped out? Okay. Of course I'm calling on her when she slipped up. So, first of all, there's only one power and one presence. And that's okay, Catherine. She doesn't have to be here. It's all right. I just thought I'd have her do some of this. But there's only one power and one presence. God is all there is. As Eric Butterworth, who is one of the Unity ministers and authors, said, there's no spot where God is not. So the second principle, therefore, this one power and presence lives as each one of us. Each one of us is an individualization of all there is in God. We are divine. So in that earlier question, which of the 5 principles speaks of the divinity of humanity? The answer would be number 2. Yeah. Our consciousness determines how we navigate and experience life. The thoughts and feelings that we nurture bear fruit in our lives. We are responsible for our consciousness. Through prayer and meditation, we realize and experience the one power and presence. Prayer and meditation align us as this presence that is our true nature. And we are the presence of God in action. We act on these principles. It's not enough just to know these things. We live it. We act on it. So when you hear me referring to the 5 basic principles, this is what I'm referring to. Does anyone have any questions on this or on anything else that I've covered so far? Anything? Okay. All right, perfect. And if you have questions, feel free to raise them. And Reverend Johanna may have some other things to share with us as well. Yes.
Number 4, as I remember, is affirmations and denials. The 3 1/3 is we align, and then we affirm what's true and deny what's not true about us.
Many times in the 4th principle, and you'll see these worded in different ways. And unity churches all hold these 5 principles in common, but sometimes they're verbalized in different ways. So often they do talk about affirmations and denials. They do not always include that. But yeah, certainly denials and affirmations, as I was speaking about. Denials are statements where we are denying, giving energy to something. Let me give another example. So I grew up thinking that I was stupid and incompetent, okay? So like in the quantum living process, identifying our shadow side, shadow beliefs, those are a couple of shadow beliefs that I grew up with, that I was stupid and incompetent, which is not true, but I that's what I believed about myself. And when one believes that about themselves, they find evidence to support that belief and act accordingly. Okay, so I acted into that belief. But I could see that there were some things wrong because I was getting some things much faster than other people, and I thought, how is that possible if I'm stupid and incompetent? Anyway, so in using unity principles, I affirmed that I am the expression of all there is in God. Therefore, I am infinite light, intelligence, and creativity. So I'm directly using a treatment to treat that subconscious belief that I am somehow stupid and incompetent. I also used denials, which is, so I deny that there's any absence of intelligence, brightness, or genius in my life at all. So that's, okay. So we use affirmations, we use denials. So, right. Often that would go under number 4 as well. Thank you, Catherine. Any other questions or thoughts about that? Yeah, you can take a picture, or we can always send this to you if we have your email, or, yeah. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or thoughts? So we basically believe that each and every one of us is the outpicturing, the showing up of the presence of God. And so prayer is a form of reminding ourselves of knowing the truth of who we are here to be. Prayer is remembering. So when prayer chaplains pray with someone else, they are helping a person to remember who they really are. I recently read a book by Marcia, who is here with us. It's a beautiful book, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, called Quest. And in this book, the protagonist, the main character, had forgotten who he was. Grief, sadness, shadow beliefs had pushed out his memory of who he really was and what his life was about. And in the book, there's this series of events that unfold that help him to really remember who he is. That's how we see prayer. That prayer is an alignment with remembering who we really are. And the person who is praying with us, if we have a prayer chaplain praying with us, their job is to pray with us not about the problem, but about the truth of who we really are. To pray the truth to help us to remember, because it's like 2 tuning forks. You strike one tuning fork, and the other one begins to resonate with it. When someone is speaking truth with us and knowing truth with us, it begins to resonate in our spirit, and we begin to embody and know that and remember it. And this is what we mean by affirmative prayer and what the Fillmores taught. Any other questions or thoughts? Reverend Johanna, I haven't given you much of a chance to talk yet. Are you? Okay, feel free if there's other things you want to share about the 5 principles or unity teachings or unity history, if there's anything.
Once you're done with the principles,
Oh, okay, all right. Yes.
Sort of a question, and maybe it's for another time, but I've spent the last year studying Sufism, and I could be misinterpreting it, but here's my question. Like in my understanding of what I've studied with Sufis, there's this whole thing about, in a way, that we are powerless because the only one that has power is God. And, it's also sort of not my will, but thy will. And so I keep getting kind of stuck on we are responsible for our consciousness. And I just wonder whether you could speak to that, because
there's something about like, I guess the idea that we're powerful, which could be very egoic, I don't know. So I'm not really sure what my question is, but that's my thought. Maybe you can just comment on that.
Thank you, and I meant to have us all introduce ourselves at the beginning. Let me breathe into that one, because I come at that from different perspectives. There is only one power and one presence, and I've studied Sufism from what's called the Shadaliya Tariqa, which is our guide lived in Jerusalem, Muhammad City. Is that the one you're studying? City? For real? Yeah, I'm part of that tariqa. My Sufi name is Amin. So in that particular line of thought, and there are varieties within Sufism, but Sufism is basically a mystical aspect that came out of Islam, very connected with Islam. And it's basically affirmed that Allah is all there is, which is very much like our first principle. There's only one power and one presence. They believe there's only Allah. Allah is all. That's it. And that each one of us is here to represent, to be the face of that one presence, because there's only one presence. So, City, this guide that I was referring to, refers to one Sufi who so embodied that and so understood that there's only one presence, that when he opened his cloak, he would say, "When I open my cloak, all you see is Allah." Like Jesus, so identified with the one power and the one presence that he knew his life was the self-livingness of that presence. Now, he did get stoned to death. Okay? Jesus got put to death too. I mean, it's still a radical idea. But when we recognize that there's only one power and one presence, I'm giving away some of the things in your book, Marcia. But, when I think of the power of praise, the power of compassion, and the power of surrender, that surrender for me means surrendering to what truly is, giving up this egoic, ego-based view that somehow in my own personality, my own ego, that I'm making things happen. But rather, it's by surrendering and allowing and being this presence, this one power and one presence, to live as me. And for me, that's what prayer really is. So it's a paradox. For me, the most powerful times of prayer have been when I've surrendered and given up. And it's in the process of surrender and giving up that I realize all that God is wants to live as me. It's a paradox, but that's not a complete answer. That's a response. Yeah, you're welcome. It was a great question. Thank you. Hey, you want to say something? You got the preacher's look on.
No, I don't, not publicly. Hold on, I do have to go home real quick. My alarms are going
off and I'll be right back.
Your alarms are going off at home. Well, we just affirm and know together that everything is well, everybody's safe. Yeah. She doesn't live too far away, so let's just all hold that together. Let me get a drink real quick. Any other questions? You need a bio break? Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah, if you need to, go ahead. And anytime you need to, just feel free to. Thanks. And I might have a break here in a little bit, but yeah. Any other questions, thoughts about these 5 principles? This is kind of the basic foundational teachings of unity. Now, there's much more. We teach about 12 powers, that each one of us has 12 innate powers that live in us. We teach about metaphysical Bible interpretation. Now, I was doing metaphysical Bible interpretation before I knew that term, because I had studied about Carl Jung and dream interpretation and symbolism and archetypes. So I was already beginning, as a Nazarene minister, to interpret things in Scripture in terms of archetypes and symbols. And I thought I was doing this all on my own. And then I found out the whole unity movement teaches this. And Charles Fillmore has this very thick book called the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary that can help us in doing that kind of work. Did I see your hand up, Catherine?
I was just going to say something real quick about the Sufi, that if you think about oneness, there's just one power, but if you're not connected to God, and I've had that experience, and you're in your ego, then you want to surrender. And it's wild for me to wake up some mornings and God, I'm connected to God, and other times I'm not. And it's like, wow, now I need to get connected. So I could see it can be a both and way of understanding.
Right. Yeah. And in order for me to really experience oneness, I was first like emptied out, bottomed out. Like Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 says, basically, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who emptied himself. There was a time in my life, and so it's called, the Greek word for emptying is kenosis. And so there's actually a theological term called kenotic theory, kenosis, about emptying ourselves. And so I went through this time in my life where life was completely empty and void and absurd, but I see it now as a precursor, as a preparation for really allowing that one power and that one presence to fully be there. It's like I first had to